smell hits you before the ship does. Tar and rope and something rotting underneath, and the river itself, wide and brown and moving slower than you expected. You are standing at the edge of it. You are 19 years old. And in 6 months you will be standing in India, or you will be at the bottom of the sea. A man dies on this voyage, not from a storm, not from a cannon. His teeth fall out first, then his joints stop working, then he bleeds from places you did not know could bleed. You watch it happen. You cannot stop it. There is a room below the waterline where 43 men sleep. The ceiling is so low you cannot sit up straight. The air in that room is something you will learn to breathe. You will have no choice. The first mate has a rope. He uses it, not as a threat. You will cross water so deep that no anchor in the world reaches the bottom. You will be out of sight of land for 60 days. 60 consecutive days with nothing in any direction but water and sky. At night, the stars are the only map. During the day, the sun is a punishment. There are rats in the bread supply. This is expected. The bread is issued anyway. You will watch a man's body go over the side of the ship, wrapped in canvas and weighted with chain. His belongings will be auctioned on the deck the following morning. The men who buy them will use them without sentiment. This is how it works. This is how it has always worked. The cargo below your feet is worth more than your life. The company knows this. You know this. The company knows you know this, and nobody says anything about it. A city is waiting at the end of this route. A city so large that the part of it built by Englishmen is a small wound on its edge, barely visible from the river. The river there smells different. Everything smells different. The heat is not the heat you know. The light is not the light you know. You will step off the gangway and your legs will not work properly because your legs have forgotten what solid ground feels like. A man will laugh at you. He will have seen this before. He has seen it 1,000 times. There is a moment, somewhere in the middle of the Indian Ocean, when the wind stops. Not slows, stops. The sails hang slack. The ship barely moves. The water around you is flat and silver, and it extends to every horizon without interruption. You have never been so far from anything. The nearest land is 400 miles away, and you cannot see it, and you cannot reach it, and nobody is coming. You will learn what it costs a body to work in heat that does not break at night. You will learn what hunger actually is, not the hunger of a skipped meal, but the hunger of weeks of insufficient food, a hunger that sits behind your eyes and slows your thinking and makes everything heavier than it should be. You will stand on a dock in Calcutta, and the ground will move under your feet, or seem to, because your feet have forgotten that the ground is supposed to stay still. You will carry cargo worth more than your father earned in a decade. You will be paid 22 shillings a month. You will not complain about this. Complaining is not available to you. A man will offer you something to eat on the dock in Calcutta, and you will not know what it is, and you will eat it anyway, and it will be the best thing you have eaten in months. You are going to survive this voyage. You do not know that yet. This is Quiet History at Bedtime. If this is your kind of story, a subscribe means everything right now. Every detail in this story comes from the historical record. Just relax and feel free to let this play as you drift off to sleep. Now, let us begin. Your name is Thomas Hale. You are 19 years old, and you were born in the parish of Wapping on the north bank of the Thames, close enough to the water that you grew up knowing its smell before you knew much else. Your father worked the docks. His father worked the docks before him. You grew up carrying things, hauling things, watching things come off ships and go on to other ships, never knowing where any of it went or where any of it came from. You cannot read. This is not unusual. Most of the men you know cannot read. What you can do is tie a knot in the dark, judge the weather by the look of the sky, and work without stopping for longer than most men think is possible. These are the skills that matter where you come from. These are the skills that got you here. You are here because of a debt. Your father borrowed money from a man named Simcox, who operates a counting house near Aldgate. The debt was 12 shillings, which is not a large amount unless you are a dock laborer whose daily wage runs to 8p on a good day and nothing on a bad one. Your father became sick in the winter of 1701. He worked less. The debt grew. By spring, it had become a different kind of problem. There are two ways out of a debt like that in 1703. The first way ends in debtor's prison, which is not a place you come back from quickly, if you come back at all. The second way is work. Not dock work. Not at those wages. Something larger. A man named Graves, who recruits for the Honorable East India Company at a tavern called the Anchor near the Legal Quays, offered you a wage of 22 shillings a month as an ordinary seaman aboard the Exeter, bound for Madras and Calcutta. You had never been to sea. This did not seem to concern Graves. What concerned Graves was that you were young, large, and clearly capable of physical labor. He gave you a shilling in advance and told you to be at the Legal Quays before dawn on the 14th of March. You signed your name with an X, which is how you always sign your name. Now let us be clear about what you have signed yourself into, because the contract Graves put in front of you was not merely an employment agreement. It was a document that transferred legal authority over your body, your time, and your behavior for the duration of this voyage to the officers of the Exeter and, beyond them, to the Honorable East India Company itself. If you disobey a direct order, you can be flogged. If you desert in a foreign port, you can be imprisoned. If you commit a serious enough offense, you can be hanged from the yardarm. These are not hypothetical consequences. They are written into the company's charter, granted by the Crown and renewed most recently in 1698, which gives the company not only the exclusive legal right to trade east of the Cape of Good Hope, but also the authority to govern its own employees in its own courts in its own fashion. The East India Company was founded in 1600 by a group of London merchants who wanted access to the spice trade controlled at the time by the Portuguese and the Dutch. By 1703, it has become something larger and stranger than its founders imagined. It is not exactly a company and not exactly a government. It is a hybrid thing, operating under royal charter, with its own army, its own navy, its own courts, its own prisons, and its own currency and certain trading posts. It employs roughly 3,000 men at sea at any given time, and maintains permanent establishments, called factories, at Madras, Bombay, and Calcutta on the Indian coast. The annual value of its trade runs to somewhere near £1.5 million. You know none of this. What you know is that the wage is 22 shillings a month, and that Graves seemed like a man who knew what he was talking about. The ship you are going to sea on is called the Exeter. She is what the trade calls an East Indiaman, which means a large, heavily built merchant vessel designed for the specific demands of this route. She is roughly 450 tons burthen, which is the company's measure of a ship's cargo carrying capacity, and she is 130 feet from bow to stern. Her beam, the width of her at the widest point, is 34 feet. She carries 24 guns, not because she is a warship, but because this route crosses oceans where the company's competitors operate and where pirates have worked the same passages for a century. The guns are loaded. They are checked weekly. You walk up the gangway on the morning of March 14th in darkness. The Exeter is already alive with noise and movement. Men are loading cargo through the main hold. A mate with a lantern is shouting numbers. Somewhere below your feet, something heavy is being dragged across a wooden floor, and the whole ship moves slightly with the effort. You report to the boatswain, whose name is Fletcher, a man of about 40 with a broken nose that was set badly, and a voice that seems to come from somewhere deep in his chest. Fletcher looks at you for about 3 seconds. He hands you a coil of rope. "Can you splice?" he asks. "I've seen it done," you say. "That's not what I asked." "No," you say. "Then you'll learn," Fletcher says. "Stow your gear forward. Don't touch anything you haven't been told to touch. Don't speak unless you're spoken to. Don't be in the wrong place." Your gear is a canvas bag that contains a spare shirt, a pair of trousers, a blanket, a knife, and a small amount of food your mother pressed on you the previous evening. This is the sum of what you own in the world. You carry it to the forward crew quarters, which are below the main deck and forward of the main mast, and you find yourself in a room that smells of tar and old sweat and the dampness that comes from wood that has been wet and dried and wet again more times than anyone has counted. The ceiling of this room is 5 feet 2 inches high. You are 5 feet 9 inches tall. You will learn to move through this space in a permanent half-crouch. After the first week, you will stop noticing you are doing it. There are 43 men before the mast on the Exeter. Before the mast is the phrase that marks the line between the officers who live in cabins in the stern and everyone else who lives in the forward quarters. The phrase comes from the physical reality of the ship. The mainmast divides the vessel, and your social position is defined by which side of it you inhabit. The officers eat with plates and utensils from a proper table. You eat from a wooden bowl with your fingers or a spoon you brought yourself, sitting on your sea chest or on the floor, depending on the sea state. The captain has a private cabin with a stern window that looks out over the water. You have a hammock 14 inches wide. The hammock is not nothing. On land, men in your position sleep on straw on floors. At sea, a hammock keeps you off the wet planking, holds you in place when the ship rolls, and the canvas absorbs enough heat from your body to keep you warm on cold nights better than a blanket on a floor would manage. You will come to think of it with something close to affection. Not now. Now it is strange and uncomfortable, and you keep sliding out of it. It is the morning of March 15th. The tide is running out to sea. The Exeter moves from the legal quays in a series of steps guided by a river pilot whose only job is knowing the Thames well enough to move a vessel of this size between the city and the open sea without putting her aground. He stands at the helm and gives orders in a low voice, and the ship obeys in slow increments. The city passes on both sides. You are on deck because Fletcher has told you to be on deck and to keep out of the way but to watch. You stand near the bow, your hands on the rail, and watch London go by. There is a smell to the river that you have known your whole life. Mud and coal smoke and refuse and something metallic underneath that you have never been able to name. It is not a pleasant smell. It is familiar, which is not the same thing. You realize, standing at the rail with the wind beginning to come off the estuary ahead, that you have never been far enough from this smell to notice what it smelled like. You are noticing it now because you are leaving it. The pilot takes the ship as far as Gravesend, where the Thames opens and the quality of the air changes, and there he goes back on a tender that meets him mid-river, stepping off the Exeter's side and onto the smaller boat with the practiced ease of a man who has done this particular thing several thousand times. The river pilot's fee for this service is a fixed rate negotiated with the company, 1 shilling and 6 per ton of the vessel's burthen, paid quarterly from the company accounts. He earns more than you will earn in 6 months of this voyage. The Exeter moves into the estuary under her own command now. The shore on both sides pulls back and flattens and becomes a distant line of marsh and gray horizon, and then it becomes a memory. And then the horizon is a clean line in all directions, and there is nothing above it but sky, and nothing below it but water. You have never been to sea. You have lived your entire life within a mile of the river, have breathed the smell of it, have carried cargo off ships that came from places you could not name, have watched the great ocean-going vessels move in and out with the tide. And it meant nothing, none of that proximity, because here, now, standing at the forward rail of the Exeter as she finds her course southwest toward the Channel, you understand for the first time that you had no idea. The water is not flat, it has texture, shape, direction. It moves under the ship in a way that the river never moved. A deep and deliberate motion that works through the hull and into the deck and up through the soles of your feet and into your chest. The ship does not simply float on top of it. The ship responds to it, negotiates with it, leans into it, and corrects and leans again. You grip the rail and watch the water and feel the first real movement of open sea under you. Fletcher appears at your shoulder. Still standing, he says. This appears to be a form of approval. Where are we going first, you ask. Down the Channel, he says. Stop at the Canaries for water. Then south and round the Horn of Africa. How long to India, you ask. Fletcher looks at you with an expression you cannot quite read. 6 months to reach her, he says. The whole voyage, there and back, 9 months or more. If everything goes right. He walks away before you can ask what happens if everything goes wrong. The watch system on the Exeter divides the crew into 2 groups called the starboard and larboard watches, which rotate on a 4 hours on, 4 hours off schedule throughout the day and night. This means you are never asleep for more than 4 consecutive hours. It means you work at midnight, at 4 in the morning, at noon, at 4 in the afternoon. It means your sense of time within a week becomes a different thing than it was on land. Not worse, exactly, just different. Built around the sound of the bell rather than the movement of the sun. You are assigned to the larboard watch under the second mate, a man named Hodges, who is 32 years old and has made this route 4 times. He is not cruel. He is not kind. He is entirely indifferent to your existence as a person and highly attentive to your existence as a unit of labor, which is the most honest relationship available to you on this ship, and possibly the most honest relationship you have ever had with a man in authority. Your duties in the first week are basic. You pull lines when ordered. You help handle the great sails, which are heavier than you expected, much heavier, requiring 6 or 8 men on a single sheet in any kind of wind. You coil rope. You scrub the deck. You pump the bilge, which must be done twice a day on a vessel of this age because wood at sea is never fully dry and the sea finds every gap. The bilge pump is a wooden cylinder operated by a handle, and the water it brings up smells like the inside of the ship's lowest and most confined spaces, which it is. You pump for 20 minutes at the start of your watch and 20 minutes at the end, and you get used to the smell or you do not, but either way you keep pumping. You are sick for the first 3 days. Not dramatically sick. You do not collapse. You do not miss your watch. But the motion of the ship, which is constantly present and constantly changing, does something to your stomach and your inner ear that your body has no language for yet and must learn from nothing. You eat less than you should and drink more water than you should, and stand on deck when you can, because the horizon gives your eyes and your body's sense of balance something to agree on. Other men are sick too. One man, older than you, does not leave the crew quarters for 2 days, and on the 3rd day comes up pale and thin and stands at the rail for an hour with his eyes on the horizon. Nobody says anything about this. Nobody would. On the 4th day the sickness is less. On the 7th day it is gone. Your hands are beginning to change. The rope work, the constant hauling, the daily contact with hemp and tar and salt water is doing something to the skin of your palms and fingers that happens quickly and without announcement. Calluses form over blisters that had already formed over the soft skin you brought aboard with you. The rope tears at the web between your thumb and forefinger. This heals and tears again and heals harder. The English Channel passes under the ship over 4 days of mostly favorable wind, and then the Atlantic opens ahead of you, and the scale of what you are undertaking becomes, for the first time, entirely real. You stand your watch in the dark. 2 in the morning, the ship moving steadily southwest, and you look at the stars. You have never paid much attention to stars in London because in London there are too many fires and too much smoke to see them properly. Out here there are thousands of them, more than you knew existed, in arrangements so dense and complicated that the sky itself seems to have weight and depth. The helmsman, a man named Cork who has sailed this route twice, shows you the Southern Cross and explains why it matters. "That's south," Cork says, pointing. "Always. Doesn't move the way the other stars do. You can always find south." "What do you do with south?" you ask. "You know where you're not," Cork says. This seems right. The Exeter is moving through a world that has been mapped, partially, by men who came before. The charts exist, the routes are known. The company has been running this passage for 100 years, and the accumulated knowledge of those 100 years is stored in the charts the captain keeps in his cabin and in the memory of every experienced officer aboard. But knowledge of a route and mastery of a route are different things, and the ocean does not respect either one equally. The ocean respects neither. What keeps you on course is a combination of the compass, the stars, and the skilled reading of wind and current that experienced sailors develop over years until it becomes something close to instinct. The captain takes a noon sighting every day the sky permits, using a quadrant to measure the angle of the sun above the horizon and calculate the ship's latitude. This gives him a north-south position. The east-west position, the longitude, is harder and less certain, calculated from the difference between local noontime and the time kept on the ship's clock, which was set to London time before departure. Errors accumulate. The captain knows this. He adjusts. He is never entirely sure where he is, but he has a working estimate, and he has the experience to know how much to trust it. The trade winds are beginning. You feel them before you understand them. The air is changing, warming. The sky a different shade of blue than the gray English sky you have known. The wind comes steadily from the northeast, consistent and reliable in a way that English weather never is, and the Exeter leans into it and accelerates to a pace that the Channel never allowed. 9, sometimes 10 knots. The log line is thrown aft and counted, and the number called out, and the captain makes a notation in the log. Every day. The same procedure, the number recorded, the position calculated. There is a rhythm developing in your body that you did not plan and cannot fully describe. 4 hours of work, 4 hours of sleep, 4 hours of work. The ship's bell marks each half hour. You begin to wake before the bell. Your body has learned the interval. This is what the sea does. It removes the complications of life on land, the overlapping demands and irregular rhythms, and replaces them with a single, merciless simplicity. You are a functioning part of a machine. The machine must move. You must contribute to its movement. Everything else is secondary to this, and the clarity of what is required is something you did not expect to find restful, and have slowly and without quite meaning to, begun to find restful. The Canaries are 14 days ahead. The water is blue now, a different blue than the gray-green of the Channel and the brown of the Thames. You hang over the bow rail at the end of your watch and look at it. Beneath the surface, in the clear water of the Atlantic, you can see a faint shadow of the hull extending downward, deeper than the light reaches. Below that is nothing. Below that is 4 miles of water, and then the floor of the sea. You are on top of it. You are 19 years old, and you have left England, and there is nothing in any direction but water and wind, and the long, patient progress of the ship beneath your feet, carrying you toward a country whose name you could not have found on a map a month ago. The bell sounds. Your watch begins. The Canaries appear on the horizon as a darkness against the sky, a denser quality of dark above the dark of the sea, and then as the morning light builds, they become mountains, actual mountains, rising from the water in shapes you have no frame of reference for, steep and brown and larger than anything you have seen. You have been at sea for 14 days. You have not touched land in 14 days. Your body understands what your mind has not yet fully registered, because your body has been responding to the ship's constant motion for 2 weeks and has learned a new version of normal. And now, as the Exeter enters the roads off Tenerife and the anchor goes down with its tremendous chain rattle, and the ship stills for the first time since England, your body does not quite know what to do with stillness. You stand on deck, and the ship is not moving, and your legs sway slightly, compensating for motion that is no longer there. Cork tells you this is called sea legs, or more precisely the absence of them, and that it will pass within a day. The island is Santa Cruz de Tenerife, and the company has been stopping here for 100 years. It is not a company port. The Canary Islands are Spanish territory, and the company's relationship with the Spanish authorities is a commercial one based on mutual advantage. The Exeter needs fresh water, fresh food, and time to check her rigging before the long run south, and the merchants of Santa Cruz are willing to sell these things at prices the company has been negotiating for long enough that the terms are nearly automatic. You go ashore with a party of 6 men under Hodges. Your instructions are to help carry water casks from the town cisterns to the longboat, and from the longboat back up to the ship's water stores. There are 60 large casks to be filled and moved. This is a full day's work. You do not carry water casks for the full day. What happens is that Hodges is delayed at the waterfront on a question of payment, and while he is delayed, the 6 men in his party are, briefly, unsupervised. 2 of them move immediately to a tavern visible from the quay. A third sits on a bollard and falls asleep. The remaining 2, yourself and a man named Petch, who is 23 and from Bristol, and who has been at sea since he was 14, walk up the main street of Santa Cruz simply because it is a street and you are on land, and that combination requires walking. The town is built in a Spanish style that means nothing to you because you have no other style of town to compare it to. But you notice the whiteness of the walls and the depth of the shade in the doorways, and the way sound moves differently here than it moves in London. There are people going about business. A woman is selling vegetables from a cart. A man in good clothes is talking to another man in good clothes outside what appears to be a counting house. Dogs are sleeping in the shade. Petch buys a piece of fruit from a market stall for a coin he has apparently been saving since London. He does not know what the fruit is called. The woman at the stall says something in Spanish, and Petch nods as if he understood and bites into it. "What is it?" you ask. "Don't know," Petch says. "Good." He hands you half. It is yellow and sweet, and nothing like any fruit available in London, where fruit is apples and pears when available, and nothing when not available. You eat it standing on a Spanish street in the Canary Islands, and this is the first time in your life you have eaten something whose name you do not know and cannot ask. Hodges finds you 20 minutes later, and his expression makes clear that the interruption to water cask loading is not something to be discussed. You fill 60 casks. The Exeter departs Santa Cruz the following morning with full water stores, a supply of fresh goat meat that will last perhaps 4 days before it must be salted, and a cargo of wine bought by the captain on company account for the officers' table. The ordinary seamen receive no wine. The ordinary seamen receive their ration. The ration is the daily reality around which everything else on this ship organizes itself. Each man before the mast receives per day a pound of biscuit, half a pound of salt beef or salt pork depending on the day, a pint of dried peas or oatmeal depending on the cook's judgment, and a gallon of beer. The gallon of beer is not luxury. Water in wooden casks at sea turns bad within weeks, developing a taste and a smell that indicate bacterial activity, and the small amount of alcohol in ship's beer keeps it from doing the same. You drink beer because beer is safe and water, increasingly, is not. The biscuit is the foundation of your diet. It is a hard, flat bread made from wheat flour and water and baked twice, the second baking driving out all remaining moisture so that it can be stored for months without going soft. What it cannot be stored against is weevils. The weevils find the biscuit within days of storage and begin their work from inside. And by the time you are a month from England, the biscuit you are eating is not entirely biscuit. The standard practice, which you adopt because the older men adopt it, and it is clearly the practice for a reason, is to knock the biscuit sharply against a hard surface before eating it, which drives the weevils to the surface where you can see them. You then eat around them, or not, depending on your hunger and your fastidiousness. Your hunger, over time, outpaces your fastidiousness. The salt meat is worse. It comes from barrels packed in brine so strong that the first step in preparing it is to soak it in seawater for several hours, which sounds paradoxical, but the seawater is less salty than the brine and actually draws some of the preservation salt out of the meat. What remains after the cook has boiled it is something that has the texture of meat and the general nutritional structure of meat, but a taste and appearance that no longer closely resembles anything you would recognize as food. You eat it because there is nothing else. The cook is a man named Sparks, which is apparently not his given name, but a name applied to him early in his career at sea for reasons no one can now remember. Sparks has been a ship's cook for 20 years, and he has the philosophical outlook of a man who has spent 2 decades feeding people in conditions designed to make good food impossible. He is not a good cook in any conventional sense. What he is efficient. He boils everything. The salt beef goes into the copper pot and boils for 2 hours. The dried peas go into the copper pot and boil for an hour. The oatmeal goes into the copper pot and boils until it is oatmeal in name only. The copper pot lives in the galley, which is a brick-lined enclosure in the forward part of the ship, specifically because fire at sea is the thing everyone fears most, and having the fire that cooks your food contained in a brick box surrounded by wet sand is the closest the ship can get to safe. You eat what Sparks produces, and you are grateful for it. Not grateful in the way you might be for good food, grateful in the way you are grateful for anything that keeps you upright and functional when the alternative is deterioration. There is a hierarchy of eating on this ship that mirrors the broader hierarchy of everything else. The captain and officers eat from the ship's stores of preserved goods, which include a better grade of provisions, supplemented by items purchased at stopping points and stored in the captain's private supply. They eat with implements. They eat at a table. On Sundays, the captain opens a bottle of wine from the supply purchased at Tenerife. This is not visible from the forward quarters. You know about it because Petch knows about it. And Petch knows about it because he once moved a crate for the steward and read the label. You eat biscuit and boiled salt pork and dried peas. On Sundays, you receive, as a small additional ration, a piece of cheese roughly the size of your fist. The cheese is hard and sharp and has been in a barrel since London. You eat it in 3 bites and it is gone. What is not in your diet at any point between ports is fresh fruit or fresh vegetables. What is absent from everything sparks boils, and everything you chew is a compound the medicine of 1703 has no name for, but whose absence from sailors' diets has been producing the same symptoms for 200 years. The disease those symptoms produce is called scurvy. The first signs are fatigue and tenderness in the joints. Then the gums begin to soften and bleed. Then old wounds reopen, because the tissue that healed them gradually fails. Then teeth loosen and fall out. The men who have sailed this route before know the progression. They have seen it. They do not explain it to you. You do not need the explanation yet. You are 19 and recently fed, and your body has reserves. But the reserves are a clock. The African coast is a presence more than a sight. You can sometimes see it as a thin line far to the east, a haze above the horizon that might be land or might be cloud, and the air changes when you are near it. There is a smell. Not unpleasant, actually. Something green and dry underneath the sea smell. The captain keeps the Exeter well offshore for reasons that have to do with current and wind, and also with the political realities of this stretch of coast. The West African coast in 1703 is a zone of intense European commercial activity, most of it connected to the slave trade, and the company's relationship to that trade is indirect but not absent. The company is not primarily a slave trading company, but it operates in a world where the slave trade is the dominant European commercial activity in this ocean, and the infrastructure it has created shapes everything else. The captain explains none of this. He navigates. A man falls from the main top on a Tuesday afternoon. His name is Drew, and he is 26 years old, and he has been at sea since he was 16, and he falls because a line he is working with gives way under tension without warning, and his balance, which is very good because it has been developed over 10 years of exactly this kind of work, cannot compensate quickly enough for the length of the drop. He falls from the main top to the deck, a distance of approximately 60 feet, and he does not move after he lands. The ship's surgeon is a man named Collier, who trained under a London physician and has made this route twice before. He examines Drew on the deck, with men standing in a circle watching, and his examination takes about 2 minutes. Drew's neck is broken. He is dead. Collier stands up and nods at Fletcher, and Fletcher gives orders, and the body is prepared. The preparation of a body for burial at sea involves wrapping the body in canvas and sewing the canvas shut. The last stitch, by tradition, passes through the nose of the deceased. The purpose is practical. It confirms the man is truly dead and not merely unconscious. Drew does not react. The canvas is closed. The captain reads the burial service from the Book of Common Prayer. You stand in 2 lines with the rest of the crew, bareheaded, while the captain reads. You did not know Drew well. You knew him as a face in the crew quarters, a man who told a particular type of joke that was funny the first time and less funny after that, a man who could shin up the main top faster than anyone else on the ship. The body goes over the side. The splash is smaller than you expected. Drew's belongings are auctioned the following morning. His blanket goes to a man named Hart for 3 pennies. His spare shirt goes for 2 pennies. His knife, which is a good one, goes for 6pence. His sea chest itself goes for a penny to a younger man who needs the storage. The money is sent to Drew's family, or would be if Drew had family. He did not. Fletcher records in the ship's log, "No next of kin." The ship moves south. Below the equator, the stars are different. This is a thing you knew intellectually, or would have known if you had thought about it, but encountering it in practice, standing your night watch and looking up at a sky in which the familiar patterns of the northern sky are gone or distorted, is a different kind of knowing. Cork shows you the Southern Cross, which he showed you once before, and now you can find it yourself, a compact diamond of bright stars pointing south, reliable and fixed while everything else rotates around it. The heat is building. It builds slowly, over weeks, so slowly that you do not notice it directly, but register its effects. The deck is warm under your bare feet in the morning, whereas in the channel it was cold. The pitch that caulks the deck seams softens slightly in the afternoon sun and sticks to your skin if you kneel on it. You drink more water than you did a month ago, or try to, because the water supply is now rationed, and the ration assumes a level of heat that has not yet been reached. So you are already drinking your full allowance and finding it insufficient. Sweat is continuous. The crew quarters below decks, which were cold and damp in the English spring, are now warm and damp, and the smell of 43 men in a space designed for 43 men in a climate that produces constant sweat is a smell that occupies the lower registers of your consciousness permanently. You no longer notice it the way you noticed it in the first week. This is either adaptation or defeat, and the distinction does not matter. There is a line on the chart called the equator. Ships have been crossing it on the African run for 200 years, and in that time sailors have developed a ceremony for the occasion. The ceremony is called crossing the line, and it is not sanctioned by the company, and it is not prevented by the company, because there are certain things that happen on ships that officers know about and choose not to know about. The men who have crossed the equator before are called shellbacks. The men who have not are called polywogs. On the day the Exeter crosses the line, the shellbacks organize a ceremony in which the polywogs, which includes you, are brought before a man dressed as Neptune, who is Cork wearing a blanket and holding a mop handle. You are required to drink a cup of something that tastes like bilge water mixed with vinegar and is probably close to that. You are shaved with a wooden razor, which means scraped with a blunt piece of wood, by a man playing the role of Neptune's barber. You are dunked briefly in a barrel of seawater. And then it is over, and you are a shellback, and the ship is south of the equator, and everything you knew about the northern half of the world is behind you and receding. The men who sailed this route before you are quiet about what comes next. Not secretive exactly, just quiet. You learn more from what they do not say than from what they say. The older men eat more when fresh food is available, more than seems reasonable, as if they are storing something. They check the rigging with a thoroughness that exceeds what daily maintenance demands. They sleep when they can sleep, not because they are tired, but because they have learned to treat available sleep as a resource with a value that fluctuates. Petch tells you, one evening when you are both off watch and sitting on the bow watching the stars, that the water south of the equator is different. Different how, you ask? It moves different, he says. The currents go the other way. Takes getting used to. You've been south before? Once, to the Cape. Didn't go on to India. What's the Cape like? Petch is quiet for a moment. It's like the end of something, he says, and the start of something else. He doesn't say more than that, and you don't press him, and the ship moves south under the stars, and the Cape of Good Hope is ahead of you, and the Indian Ocean is beyond it. And at the end of the Indian Ocean is India, and between here and there are weeks of open water and the accumulated risks of a route that kills men at a rate the company has accepted as the cost of doing business. There is a particular depth to the dark on a clear night south of the equator that you will spend the rest of your life trying to explain to people who have not seen it, and mostly failing. It is not that there are more stars, though there are more. It is that the darkness between them has a depth the sky over London never had, a sense that you are looking into something rather than looking at something. The light of London, the fires and candles and lanterns of the most densely populated city in England, creates a permanent haze that sits between you and the sky. Out here there is no haze. There is no land for 1,000 miles in any direction. The sky goes all the way down to the horizon and meets the sea, and between those two surfaces you are a small thing on a wooden ship, and you are the only thing moving in it. The Southern Cross is bright and steady above the horizon. It is pointing south. You are going that way. There is something else the older men do not tell you about the long run south, something you learn only by accumulating the evidence of weeks. A ship at sea for months is not merely a vessel moving from one point to another. It is a small, sealed society with its own politics, its own economy, its own justice, and its own memory. The men who have sailed together before share a shorthand you do not yet have. The men who have sailed this route before share a knowledge you are still acquiring. The men who have been at sea their whole lives carry an understanding of how confined spaces work, how men in close quarters manage proximity and fatigue and fear that has no equivalent in the life of a London dock laborer. You are learning this understanding the only way it can be learned: by living inside it. Hart is the man who keeps the piece of mirror in his sea chest. He is 31 years old, and he was born in Cornwall, and he has been at sea since he was 12. He does not talk much. What he does in the evenings when the watch is below and the ship is on a steady course and there is an hour before sleep that is not quite claimed by anything, is carve. He keeps a short piece of hardwood in the bottom of his sea chest, a dense, dark wood he acquired at some port of call he will not specify, and he carves it with a knife into shapes that accumulate slowly over weeks into something that might be a fish, or might be a face, or might be something he has not yet decided. You watch him carve sometimes. He does not explain what he is making. You do not ask. There is a quality to those evening hours below decks, with the ship moving on a steady course and the bell marking the half hours and the men doing the small private things that make up the interior of a life, that you will carry with you after this voyage is over, not as a memory of comfort exactly, as a memory of what it looks like when men have made peace with a situation they did not choose and cannot leave, and have found inside those constraints something that is not quite peace but is adjacent to it. The ship moves. You are somewhere in the South Atlantic. England is behind you, and India is ahead, and between those 2 points is everything you do not yet know, and everything you are becoming. The watch bell rings. You take your place at the line. The Southern Cross is bright and steady above the horizon. It is pointing south. You are going that way. The Cape of Good Hope is not what the name suggests. You see it first as a darkness on the horizon, low and dense, unlike the mountain shapes of Tenerife. It grows slowly, over hours, resolving into something harder and more specific. A flat-topped rock shelf dropping sheer into the sea. The stone a dark gray-brown, and the water around its base a different color from the open ocean, darker and more agitated, as if the sea itself is uncertain what to do here. The wind, which has been coming from the northwest for 3 days, shifts. It always shifts here. The sailors who have been south before go quiet when they see it. Hetch told you it was like the end of something and the start of something else. He was right. The Cape of Good Hope is the southernmost navigable point of the African continent, and for 100 years it has been the hinge on which the entire eastern trade turns. East of this point, the world belongs to a different set of rules, different winds, different currents, different stars in different positions, a different version of the sea. The Portuguese navigator Bartolomeu Dias rounded it first in 1488, and he called it the Cape of Storms, which is the accurate name. The name Good Hope came later, applied by the Portuguese crown, to make the route sound less like what it is. What it is dangerous. The seas below the Cape, in the latitudes between 40 and 50 degrees south, are the roughest in the world. There is no land mass below this point to interrupt the wind, which circles the globe continuously at these latitudes, building seas that can run 50, 60, 70 feet from trough to crest. Ships have been rounding this point for a century, and ships have been lost rounding this point for a century, and the company's records in London contain the names of vessels that left England and were never heard from again, their fate a permanent question mark in the ledger. The Exeter does not go far south. The captain's strategy, which is the strategy of every experienced commander on this route, is to find the fastest path between the Atlantic winds and the Indian Ocean monsoon, without exposing the ship to the worst of the Southern Ocean. This means staying as close to the Cape as the weather allows, reading the conditions daily, and making decisions that balance speed against risk in calculations that only experience can perform. The captain has been on this route 6 times. He makes these calculations quietly in his cabin at noon, and then he gives orders. You follow the orders. The immediate order, as the Exeter approaches the Cape from the northwest, is to shorten sail. You have been working sails for 2 months, and your hands know the ropes without your eyes needing to find them, which is the kind of knowledge that only repetition produces, and which you did not have when you left London. You go up the ratlines with 4 other men and work the main topsail while the wind builds from the south, and the canvas fights you because canvas that size in that wind is not a material but a force, and you brace against the yard and haul and do not let go. The sea state changes within an hour of the Cape. The long, even swells of the South Atlantic, which you have grown accustomed to over the past weeks, give way to something less predictable. The waves here are shorter and steeper, coming from 2 or 3 directions simultaneously because the wind wraps around the Cape and meets itself, and the Exeter moves through them with a different motion. A sharper, less rhythmic pitch and roll that wakes things up in your stomach that you thought had settled months ago. You are not sick, but it is close. The Cape Station is at a place called Table Bay, named for the flat-topped mountain that stands behind it and that is visible for miles at sea on a clear day. The Dutch East India Company, the VOC, established a settlement here in 1652, more than 50 years before your voyage, specifically to serve as a resupply point for their own ships on the same eastern route. The settlement has grown into a small town of perhaps 2,000 people. Dutch and German settlers, enslaved Malays and Indonesians brought by the VOC from their eastern territories. Khoi people who were here before any European ship arrived, and a floating population of sailors from every nation that trades east of the prime meridian. The English East India Company and the Dutch VOC are competitors. They have been competitors since the beginning of the century, fighting wars over the spice trade in the East Indies, undercutting each other's prices in the London and Amsterdam markets, maneuvering diplomatically at the courts of Indian rulers who are perfectly aware that European trading companies want very different things from each other. The competition is real and occasionally violent. At Table Bay, it is temporarily set aside. The logic is straightforward. Every ship that rounds the Cape needs the same things: fresh water, fresh food. Time to check rigging and repair what the southern seas have done to it. The VOC runs the only established supply infrastructure at this end of Africa, and the EIC ships use it because there is nowhere else. And the Dutch charge for the service and the English pay, and both sides understand that this particular transaction serves both parties well enough that the larger competition does not interfere with it. The Exeter anchors in Table Bay on a morning in late May. You have been at sea for 11 weeks. The mountain called Table Mountain stands behind the settlement with its flat top catching cloud that spills over the edge and dissipates in the warmer air below. And the settlement itself is small and white and organized around a fort that the Dutch built first and have been expanding ever since. The fort is called the Castle of Good Hope, and it is the center of VOC authority at this end of Africa. Its walls thick stone, its guns pointed at the bay. You go ashore in a work party, as you went ashore at Tenerife, and the work is similar: water casks, provisions, the heavy labor of moving things between the ship and the shore in longboats that sit low in the water under the weight. But something is different. At Tenerife you were new to the sea, and the island was foreign and strange, and you were mostly trying to keep pace with the work. Here, 11 weeks later, you are not new, and you notice things. You notice the quality of the light, which is sharper and cleaner than London light, a southern hemisphere autumn light that comes from a different angle and falls on everything with a clarity that makes the colors of the settlement's whitewashed walls and the mountain's gray stone more vivid than they should logically be. You notice the smell of the settlement, which is wood smoke and livestock, and the sea, and underneath it something green and dry. The smell of the African interior carried on the wind. You notice that the people in the settlement move at a pace that has nothing to do with the compressed urgency of a city of 500,000. Fletter gives you 2 hours after the water casks are loaded. 2 hours is not much. 2 hours is more than you have had in 11 weeks. You walk up from the waterfront into the settlement with Petch, who has been here before and navigates with the confidence of a man who knows where things are. He takes you to a market where local produce is sold, vegetables and dried fruit and bread baked that morning, and you buy a loaf of bread for a penny and eat half of it standing at the market stall. The bread is soft and fresh, and you have not eaten soft fresh bread since London. And the difference between fresh bread and ship's biscuit is not a difference of quality, but a difference of kind. You buy dried fruit. Petch insists on this. He does not explain why. Eat it on the ship, he says. All of it. Don't trade it. You have learned not to question Petch on practical matters. You put the dried fruit in your jacket pocket. What Petch knows, and does not tell you, is that the dried fruit will do something specific inside your body. Your gums, which have been slightly tender for the past 3 weeks, will stop being tender within 4 days of eating it. A bruise on your forearm that has been slow to fade will begin to fade. You will feel, within a week of leaving Table Bay, more alert and more capable than you have felt since leaving England. You do not know any of this. You think the fruit is just fruit. Fletter finds you at the hour mark and puts you back to work. The Exeter spends 3 days at Table Bay. In those 3 days, the crew loads 40 fresh water casks, 2 live sheep purchased from a Dutch farmer for the officers' table, a supply of dried vegetables, and a quantity of fresh bread sufficient for 4 days. The rigging is inspected by the boatswain, and 2 sections of running rigging are replaced where the southern seas have stressed the hemp beyond safe use. A seam in the Exeter's hull, opened slightly by the movement of the Cape waters, is recalked by the carpenter with oakum and pitch. The pitch is heated in a small pot on the dock, and the smell of it drifts across the water. On the morning of the 4th day, the anchor comes up. The Cape station falls behind. The Exeter turns east. The Indian Ocean begins here. It does not announce itself. There is no line in the water where the Atlantic ends and the Indian Ocean begins. The charts say the boundary runs south from the tip of Africa, but the sea does not consult charts. What changes is the character of the water and the wind and the light, gradually, over days, as the ship moves northeast away from the Cape and into the latitudes where the monsoon system operates. The monsoon is the governing fact of Indian Ocean navigation. It is a seasonal reversal of wind direction driven by the differential heating of the Asian landmass and the ocean, and it has been the mechanism by which trade between Arabia, India, and East Africa has functioned for 2,000 years before any European ship entered this ocean. Arab traders understood it and used it. The Portuguese, when they arrived in the late 15th century, learned it from the Arab navigators they encountered, sometimes by conversation and sometimes by capture. The English learned it from the Portuguese. In the northern part of the Indian Ocean, northeast of your current position, the southwest monsoon runs from May to September, bringing strong and reliable winds from the southwest that push ships from Africa toward India. You are leaving the Cape in late May. If the captain times the passage correctly, the Exeter will catch the monsoon at its full strength somewhere north of Madagascar and be pushed the remaining distance to the Indian coast in weeks rather than months. If the timing is wrong, the ship waits. Waiting at sea costs money in provisions and time, and the accumulated wear on a crew that is already 11 weeks from home. The captain does not want to wait. He pushes northeast at every opportunity the wind allows. The sky is changing. South of the Cape, the sky was a specific shade of blue, cold and deep, the blue of high southern latitudes where the atmosphere is thin and clear. North of the Cape, moving toward the tropics, the sky softens. It becomes hazy at the edges. The horizon, which has been a clean line since the Channel, develops a slight indistinctness, a suggestion of heat that distorts the boundary between sea and air. There are flying fish. They break the surface in groups of 20 or 30 and travel through the air for distances of 30 or 40 feet before re-entering the water, their rigid fins holding them aloft in a glide that is not quite flight. The first time you see them, in the waters north of Madagascar, you stop working and watch them. Hart, who is near you, tells you what they are without being asked. Flying fish, Hart says. I see that, you say. Good eating, Hart says, if you can catch them. The flying fish do not land on the deck often enough to matter as a food source, but the watching of them costs nothing, and there is very little out here that costs nothing. Your body is changing in ways beyond what the early weeks produced. You are thinner than you were in London, not dangerously thin, not yet, but the kind of thin that comes from months of physical labor on a diet calibrated to sustain function rather than restore what labor takes. Your face in the small piece of mirror that Hart keeps in his sea chest looks older than 19. The shoulders on your jacket hang differently than they did in March. The sun in the Indian Ocean latitudes in June does not climb to the mild overhead position of English summer. It climbs to a point directly above you, or nearly so, and it stays there from mid-morning to mid-afternoon, and the heat it produces is not the heat of England in summer, not even close. It is a weight. It presses down on the deck and on your skin and on the inside of your skull, and it does not relent. The deck surface in direct sunlight at noon can blister skin. You have learned to wear your jacket even in the heat, because the jacket is between your skin and that sun, and the sweat it traps is less damaging than the burn. You drink your full water ration at every distribution. You are always thirsty. The water casks loaded at Table Bay are diminishing. The captain ordered 40 casks, and the daily consumption of 43 men plus officers runs to approximately 90 gallons per day. At that rate, the supply lasts roughly 20 days at full ration, and the Indian Ocean crossing to Madras from the Cape runs to 30 or 35 days under good monsoon conditions. The ration is reduced. Not dramatically, not to the point of crisis, but the measure you receive at the morning distribution is not the full gallon, and you notice the difference by the middle watch, when your mouth is dry and the heat has been building since dawn and there is nothing to drink until the next distribution. You learn to manage thirst the way you have learned to manage every other discomfort on this ship, not by resolving it, but by reducing its presence in your attention to the minimum necessary to function. There is a man in your watch named Simmons, who is 38 years old, and who has made this route 4 times, and who has, in the 2 weeks since the Cape, developed a cough that does not go away. It is not a dramatic cough. It is a dry, persistent thing that arrives in the middle of the night watch and settles in for hours. Simmons does not mention it. Nobody mentions it to him. The code of the forward quarters on illness is specific. You do not remark on another man's symptoms unless he has collapsed, because remarking on symptoms is the first step toward acknowledging a situation that nobody has any power to change, and acknowledging powerlessness at sea is a different kind of danger. You notice it because you sleep 12 feet from Simmons, and the cough wakes you on your off-watch hours, and once you are awake in the heat of the Indian Ocean night, the sleep does not come back easily. You lie in your hammock and listen to the ship, the creak of the hull working against itself. The movement of water along the outside of the planking, a few inches from your ear. The sound of the ship is a language now. You have learned enough of it to distinguish the routine sounds from the sounds that mean something is changing. And right now, everything is routine, and the ship moves northeast, and somewhere above you the monsoon is pushing the great sails full, and India is shortening its distance. You lie in your hammock. You think about London, not the London of memory and comfort, because you did not have that London. The London you think about is specific and physical. The smell of the river at low tide, the sound of cartwheels on the cobbles at dawn, the weight of a cargo bale over your shoulder, the gray diffuse light in the narrow streets off the legal quays in winter. You think about your mother's kitchen, which is a small room with a fire that smokes when the wind comes from the east, and the bread she makes, which is nothing like the soft bread of the Cape Market, and nothing like ship's biscuit, and is simply itself, the bread of that kitchen, the bread you ate every morning of your first 19 years without thinking about it. You are thinking about it now. The monsoon pushes northeast. The Exeter follows it. The monsoon finds you 10 days north of Madagascar. You feel it before it is fully established, a change in the quality of the air, a warmth and moisture in the wind from the southwest that is different from the Cape winds and different from the trade winds of the Atlantic. The Exeter's sails fill and stiffen, and the ship leans to starboard and accelerates, and the log line comes back with a number that makes Hodges write it down twice. 9 knots, sustained. The Indian Ocean, under the southwest monsoon, is not the hostile empty space of the southern Atlantic. It is a road. It has been a road for 2,000 years. The wind comes reliably from the southwest, and the current runs northeast, and the ship moves on them as if placed on rails, requiring less adjustment, less constant labor with the sails, less of the effortful maintenance, of course, that has characterized the Atlantic Passage. What it requires instead is endurance. Because the road is long and the sun is different here. There is a man on the larboard watch named Reeves who is 44 years old and who has made 5 voyages to India and who carries, somewhere in the locked compartment of his sea chest, a small paper-wrapped object he has been transporting since London. You know it exists because Petch told you it exists. You know nothing else about it. Reeves does not discuss it. On a night watch 3 weeks after the Cape, when the ship is moving well and the stars are sharp and there is nothing to do for an hour except stand your post and stay awake, Reeves tells you without being asked that the object is a letter. He was paid 6 shillings by a man in London to carry a letter to a factor in Calcutta. The factor is the man's son. The son has been in Calcutta for 4 years. The father, who is old and not in good health and knows it, wants to send his son a message, and the fastest way to send a message to Calcutta in 1703 is to give it to a sailor on an East India Company ship and pay him to carry it. Does the son know it's coming, you ask? Don't know, Reeves says. What if something happens to you before we get there? Reeves considers this for a moment. Then it doesn't get there, he says. He says this without particular emotion, which is the only way to say it. There are no alternatives. There is no postal system that reaches Calcutta. There is no telegraph, no reliable overland courier, no mechanism by which a father in London can reliably communicate with a son in Bengal except this: a sailor, a letter, a ship, a route that takes 6 months in one direction and kills men along the way. Reeves delivers the letter. You are there when he does, or rather you are nearby, working in the adjacent go-down, and you see the transaction. Reeves finds the factor through a company clerk, presents the letter, the factor reads the name on the outside, and his face changes in a way that his face was not changing before, and Reeves turns and walks back to the ship without ceremony. 6 shillings. A father's message delivered. You think about this sometimes in the evenings, in your hammock in the heat of the Indian Ocean night, listening to Simmons cough, and to the hull moving through the water, and to the ship breathing around you. There are things that cross this ocean in the holds of these ships that have nothing to do with the company's ledgers, letters, grief. The specific weight of what a person cannot say to someone they may not see again. You think about your own father in his chair by the fire. You think about the 12 shillings. India is not quite 3 weeks away now. You pull your hammock close around your shoulders. The ship moves northeast. The monsoon pushes the great sails full. The Exeter follows it. Simmons dies on a Wednesday. You know it is Wednesday because the cook gives out the cheese ration on Sundays and the salt pork on Wednesdays, and Simmons receives his Wednesday pork at the morning distribution and carries it back to his hammock and does not eat it, and at the afternoon watch change he does not respond when Fletcher calls his name, and Collier the surgeon is summoned, and Collier examines him for 2 minutes and stands up and nods. Simmons has been coughing for 3 weeks. In the final days the cough was less frequent, which you took as improvement and which was not improvement. It was the body running out of energy for the work of coughing. The fever that replaced it was continuous and high, and Simmons lay in his hammock and did not speak and did not eat, and the men in the forward quarters worked around him with the careful, practical consideration that men in confined spaces develop for unavoidable suffering, making less noise than usual in the off-watch hours, keeping their movements compact, not asking questions. The body is prepared. The last stitch passes through the nose. The captain reads from the Book of Common Prayer at the rail. You stand in line. You have done this before with Drew, and the second time is not easier, but it is more legible. You understand the ceremony now. You understand what it is for, which is not comfort exactly, but the imposition of a recognizable shape on an event that otherwise has no shape. A man was alive. He is dead. The sea will take him. The words mark the boundary. Simmons goes over the rail. The auction is the following morning. His blanket goes for 4 pennies because it is a good blanket. His wooden bowl goes for nothing because everyone has a wooden bowl. His boots, which are a better quality than most men in the forward quarters own, go for 8 pence to a man named Walsh, who has had his eye on them since they left England. Walsh wears them that afternoon. The sea is flat under a high white sky, the monsoon steady, the Exeter moving at 8 knots northeast. Collier holds sick call in the mornings, in a small compartment near the forward quarters that serves as his surgery. It contains a wooden table, a chest of medical supplies, and a smell that you have learned to breathe around. The medical chest contains items whose names Collier has explained to no one in the forward quarters, and whose functions are understood only partially by Collier himself, because the medicine of 1703 is a system built from equal parts observation, inherited theory, and inference, and the inherited theory is wrong in ways that will not be corrected for another century. The dominant theory of disease in 1703 is the miasmatic theory, which holds that illness is caused by bad air, specifically the air that rises from rotting organic matter, standing water, and certain kinds of soil. This theory is not entirely without observational foundation, because many diseases do cluster around the conditions the theory identifies, but the causal mechanism it proposes is wrong. Disease is not caused by bad air. Disease is caused by pathogens, which the medicine of 1703 has no concept of. Collier treats fever with bleeding, which removes blood from the patient on the theory that fever is caused by an excess of blood. The theory is wrong, and the treatment weakens patients who are already weakened. But it is the standard of care, and Collier applies it conscientiously. He treats digestive complaints with compounds made from herbs stored in the chest. He treats wounds with vinegar, which is antiseptic without Collier knowing the word antiseptic or the mechanism behind it. You visit Collier on a Thursday morning. Not because you are ill. You visit him because Fletcher has told you to help move a chest from the surgery to the hold, a task that requires 2 men and provides the opportunity, while the chest is being moved, to look at what is in the surgery and understand what resources are available on this ship for the management of your physical survival. What you see is this: a chest containing perhaps 30 small bottles and jars, most of them labeled in Latin, a set of metal instruments for bleeding and for the extraction of teeth, a supply of bandaging cloth that has been used and re-washed multiple times, a small amount of opium in a glass bottle with a wax seal, and a box of the hard lozenges that Collier distributes for coughs. The opium is for serious pain. The lozenges are for everything else. You carry the chest and say nothing and go back to your duties. The Indian Ocean in the second week after the Cape has a rhythm that is different from the Atlantic rhythm and different from the Channel rhythm, and is specific to itself. The swells are long and regular, coming from the southwest behind you, lifting the Exeter's stern gently and passing beneath her and moving on ahead. The motion is slower and more deliberate than anything you have experienced on this voyage, a deep rolling progress that is almost soothing in its regularity once your body adjusts to it, which your body has done. You are at the helm one afternoon. This is not a standard assignment for an ordinary seaman. The helm is the responsibility of the more experienced men, the able seamen and petty officers who have the skill and the judgment to hold a course in variable conditions. But the second mate, Hodges, has been watching you work for 3 months, and 3 months of watching a man work tells you things about him. And what Hodges has observed is that you have good hands and a steady attention, and a quality of stillness that helm work requires. He puts you at the wheel for 2 hours on a quiet afternoon. Hold her northeast, he says. The compass is there. Wind is fine. Don't fight it. The wheel is a double wheel, 2 concentric rings of wooden spokes, and the resistance in it when the sea is running is not resistance exactly but a conversation. The rudder reading the water and reporting back through the mechanism and requiring a response. Too much response, and the ship yaws off course and the sails lose their set. Too little, and the sea takes the steering away from you. The correct response is something between insistence and listening. You hold her northeast. For 2 hours you hold the Exeter on her course in the Indian Ocean under the southwest monsoon, and the only sound is the water along the hull and the wind in the rigging and the creak of the wheel mechanism under your hands. Hodges returns at the 2-hour mark and takes the wheel without comment, which is as close to approval as Hodges gets. The days pass. They pass in the watch system's 4-hour increments, each increment defined by its work and its light and its heat. The morning watches are the best, before the sun has climbed past manageable, when the air carries a brief coolness that is almost like the English air you remember, and the sea is a dark blue-gray in the pre-dawn and then lightens through stages to the brilliant hard blue of full day. The noon watches are the worst. The afternoon watches are endurance. The night watches are their own category, dark and hot and punctuated by the bell and the stars and the sound of the ocean moving around you. You learn things on the night watches that you do not learn anywhere else. On one such night, Hart, who has sailed to India before, talks about the Mughal court. Not Cork this time, not the usual channel for information on this ship, but Hart, who has a cousin who was a factor in Madras for 3 years and came back with stories. The emperor in 1703 is Aurangzeb, the 6th Mughal ruler, who has governed for more than 40 years and who is in the final years of a reign that has extended the empire to its greatest geographical size while simultaneously beginning the process of its fracture. Aurangzeb is 84 years old. He is conducting a military campaign in the Deccan that has been ongoing for 26 years and that has not achieved its objectives, and is draining the treasury and the patience of the nobles who hold the empire together. You do not understand the full weight of this. What Hart explains, simply, is that the company's trading rights at Calcutta depend on imperial decrees granted by the Mughal court, and when the empire changes shape, those rights become uncertain. If Aurangzeb dies, everything shifts. Nobody knows into what. So we work for the emperor, you ask? We work near him, Hart says. There's a difference. What's the difference? The difference is that if the emperor dies before we get there, everything changes and nobody knows how. You think about this for a moment, looking at the stars. The ocean has nothing to say about Mughal succession. The ocean continues its patient business of moving the ship northeast. An albatross finds the ship. It is large, larger than any bird you have seen, with wings that spread perhaps 8 or 9 feet from tip to tip, and it glides on the wind without effort, without the working of its wings, riding the updraft above the waves in long curves that carry it across the water without visible exertion. It follows the Exeter for the better part of an afternoon, always at the same distance, always at the same height above the waves, neither approaching nor receding. Cork watches it from the rail beside you. Bad luck landing on a ship, Cork says. Has one ever landed on a ship? Not while I've been watching. The albatross was born at sea. It will die at sea. The land is a memory or an abstraction for an albatross, a thing it visits briefly for nesting and then leaves. The ocean is where it lives entirely, and it moves through it without effort. Then it turns and is gone. The water is beginning to change color. You notice it first in the morning light, a slight warming of the blue. a green undertone in the deep water that was not there 2 days ago. The color change is slow and subtle, and you would not have noticed it in March. But your eyes have been reading water for 5 months, and they catch the shift. You mention it to Hodges. Hodges looks at the water. River sediment, he says, moving out from the coast. India. You scan the horizon from the main top during your afternoon watch, your feet braced against the top's rim, the ship moving northeast beneath you, and on the second day of the color change, in the late afternoon, with the light going golden across the water, something appears on the northeastern horizon that is not cloud. It is darker than cloud. It does not move the way cloud moves. You stay at the top for an hour, watching it resolve, and it does resolve, slowly, from a smudge to a line to something unmistakably solid, low against the water, green where everything else is blue. You call it down to the deck. The word passes from man to man before you have finished descending the ratlines. Land. You are standing at the bow of the Exeter with your hands on the rail, and you look at the coast of India. It is low and green and very far away, a smudge above the sea that takes shape slowly as the ship closes the distance, and the men around you are quiet in a way they have not been quiet since England, not the quiet that followed Symonds going over the rail. This is different. This is the quiet of arrival, of a thing that has been theoretical becoming actual, of months of effort and deprivation and endurance arriving, without ceremony, at its purpose. The smell. There it is. Green and warm and thick and nothing like the sea smell and nothing like the London smell and nothing like anything you have encountered before. It comes across the water and hits you like a hand on the chest, and it is extraordinary. It is the smell of a continent exhaling toward you across the water, vegetation and soil and heat and life. You breathe it in. India. The Coromandel coast runs north-south along the eastern edge of the subcontinent, a low shoreline with no natural harbors, exposed to the full force of the Bay of Bengal in storm season, and offering ships no shelter except the roads, the offshore anchorages where vessels wait for tides and pilots. You move along it for 2 days before the Hooghly River mouth, close enough to see the color of the land and to smell it, but not close enough to resolve any details. What you can see is green. Everything is green. It is a green that has no equivalent in England, where green is a modest color, the color of fields in summer before the harvest takes them, the color of the verges along the road to Greenwich. The green of this coastline is something different in kind, darker and denser and more alive, as if the vegetation here is not merely present on the land but is engaged with it, working the soil and the heat into something that produces this specific intensity of color. You stand at the rail and watch it. Hart stands beside you. Neither of you says anything for a long time. "It's large," Hart says finally. "This is accurate. It is also insufficient. The scale of the subcontinent, which you can barely see, is already apparent in the way the coastline extends to both horizons without visible end. England fits inside this coast several times over, and what you can see is only the edge of it. How far does it go, you ask? West, Hart says, a long way west, weeks by land. You think about this. You think about the fact that the entire voyage you have made, 6 months across 2 oceans, has brought you to the edge of something whose interior you will never see and whose size you cannot hold in your mind. The company's establishments at Madras and Calcutta and Bombay are wounds on the surface of a continent that existed, as Hart put it, a long way in every direction, and that will continue to exist long after the company's ledgers have been forgotten. You do not think these words in this order. You simply stand at the rail and feel the scale of the thing, and it is very large. The Bay of Bengal opens to the north as the Coromandel coast curves east, and then the Hooghly River mouth opens ahead of you, and the coast of India becomes the banks of a river, and the river becomes the approach to a city, and the city becomes the anchor point of everything the company has been building in Bengal for 13 years, and you arrive. There is one more thing that happens before the coast becomes the river, and the river becomes Calcutta. The captain calls the full crew on deck on the afternoon before the anchorage. This is not routine. Full crew assembly, all hands present, no watch rotation, happens for 3 reasons on a ship like the Exeter: a burial, a serious disciplinary matter, or a formal address. It is not a burial today. The captain stands on the quarterdeck and speaks in the carrying voice that captains develop, a voice calibrated to be heard over the wind and the ship's noise and the sound of the sea, even on a quiet afternoon like this one. He speaks for perhaps 10 minutes. He says that the company's establishment at Calcutta is a small English presence in an enormous and ancient country. He says that the men under his command will conduct themselves with discipline, that they will not wander beyond the limits set by the company's factors, that they will not engage in private trade without a license, that they will not insult or assault the local population, and that any man who does any of these things will face company justice, which is not lenient. He says that the company's relationships in Bengal have been built over 13 years and can be damaged in an afternoon. He says that the behavior of every man on this ship reflects on the company. He does not say the company's presence here rests on the tolerance of a Mughal empire with 100 times more people than England and a military establishment that could remove us in a season if it chose. He does not say we are guests here, not rulers, whatever we tell ourselves. He does not say these things because they are not things a captain says to his crew in 1703. But the men who have been here before hear what is behind the words, and you, who have not been here before, watch the faces of those men and hear it in their faces instead. You will behave yourself. Not because you are virtuous, because you are 19 years old and very far from home, and the company is all the protection you have. The river narrows around the bend. You can see it narrowing, the banks pressing in from both sides, the vegetation thickening, the water darker and more opaque than the open bay. The river pilot calls adjustments in Bengali, and the helmsman responds, and the ship moves through the narrowing with a precision that has nothing to do with the English sailors and everything to do with the man at the wheel who has been reading this river for 20 years. A kingfisher crosses the water ahead of the bow. It is a dart of color, blue and orange, so fast that it is almost not there, crossing the river at water level in a single straight line from one bank to the other, and then it is gone into the vegetation on the eastern bank, and the water is the same water, and the air is the same air, and the only evidence that it happened is the memory in your eyes that will still be there in London, in November, in the cold, when you are trying to remember what this looked like. You are going to forget most of this voyage. Not the facts of it. The facts will stay because the facts are useful, and your mind is a practical instrument that holds what it needs. But the specific texture of the light on the river this afternoon, the precise color of that bird, the smell of the air here at the bend of the Hooghly an hour before the anchor goes down in Calcutta for the first time in your life, these will fade. You know this even as it is happening. You cannot stop it. There is something else the Hooghly does to you that the Indian Ocean did not do. The Indian Ocean is abstract. It is enormous and featureless, and the enormity becomes, over weeks, a kind of numbness. You stop registering the scale because the scale is constant, and human perception is designed for change rather than for constancy. 6 weeks on the Indian Ocean teaches you to stop seeing the Indian Ocean. The river teaches you to see again. It is narrow enough to have 2 sides. It is specific. There are things on its banks that your eyes can resolve into detail. The specific shape of a particular tree, the posture of a man working at the water's edge, the color of a cloth spread on a bank to dry. After weeks of looking at nothing, your eyes are hungry for detail, and the river feeds them. One specific thing after another, and you consume it all without being able to name most of it. A child on the eastern bank watches the ship pass. The child is perhaps 8 or 9 years old, standing in shallow water at the bank's edge, watching the Exeter move upstream with an expression of complete composure, not fear, not excitement, not the waving that a London child would do at a passing ship, just watching. The child watches the ship pass, and you watch the child watching the ship pass, and then the bend takes you away from each other, and neither of you will ever know the other existed. You were there, though. You were both there. The watch bell rings. Your hands tighten on the rail. You do not move from the bow. The Exeter anchors in the roads at Madras first. Madras is the company's oldest settlement on this coast, established in 1639, and its landmark from the sea is Fort St. George, the company's fortification built on a low promontory directly on the shore. From the roads you can see the fort's walls, white in the morning light, and behind them the town that has grown up around the company's presence. A settlement of perhaps 10,000 people, English and Indian, merchants and soldiers and servants and the families of all of them, organized in a pattern that reflects the logic of colonial commerce. The company's factors come out to the Exeter in a boat. Factors are the company's trading agents, the men who stay in India year-round, managing the warehouses and the trading relationships and the endless negotiation with local merchants and Mughal officials that keeps the commerce functioning. They are not sailors. They are bookkeepers and negotiators, men in coats despite the heat, carrying papers. They come aboard and go directly to the captain's cabin and stay there for 2 hours while the ship sits at anchor in the roads. You watch them come aboard. You watch the faces of the men from the boat as they climb the gangway, and what you notice is that they have a quality you have not seen in any of the men on the ship. They are acclimatized, not to the sea but to this specific place, to this light and this heat and this air, in a way that settles their movements and their expressions into something different from the urgent purposefulness of men on a ship. They move as if time operates differently for them, which in some sense it does. The company's factors in India serve rotations of several years. Some of them do not go back. The captain emerges from his cabin after 2 hours. The Exeter resumes her voyage north. The Bay of Bengal is shallower than the Indian Ocean proper, and its color is different, greener and less clear. You can feel the proximity of the subcontinent even when you cannot see it, in the heat that comes off the land on the easterly breeze, in the smell that has been present since Madras and which intensifies as the ship moves north. The Hooghly River mouth. The river is enormous. It is not a river mouth in the way English rivers have mouths, a neat narrowing where the land closes in. The Hooghly opens into the bay over a width of several miles, and the boundary between the river and the sea is a question of color and current rather than geography. Brown water asserting itself gradually against the salt water, the two mixing in shifting patches visible from the deck. The river pilot comes out on a boat. This pilot is an Indian man, older, who has been navigating the Hooghly for more than 20 years and whose knowledge of its shifting sandbanks and current patterns is more detailed than any chart in the captain's cabin. He comes aboard, speaks to the captain through an interpreter, and takes the helm without ceremony. His hands on the wheel are different from the hands of the English sailors you have watched at the helm. His touch is lighter. He reads the river through the wheel in a way that suggests a relationship with this specific body of water that is older and more intimate than anything a visiting sailor could develop in a lifetime of voyages. The Exeter moves up the Hooghly. The riverbanks are low and green on both sides, dense with vegetation that comes to the water's edge in places, and there are boats everywhere. Small boats, large boats, boats with triangular sails, boats rowed by men standing, boats laden to the waterline with goods you cannot identify from this distance. There is activity everywhere on this river, a constant commerce that dwarfs the traffic on the Thames, and the scale of it strikes you in a way that no prior description could have prepared you for. A bird lands on the bowsprit. It is green, intensely green, smaller than your hand, and it sits on the bowsprit and looks at you with one eye and then the other, and then flies away into the vegetation on the western bank. You have never seen a green bird. The birds of England are brown and gray, and this bird is the color of the riverbank in direct sunlight. A green so specific and saturated that it seems to be making an argument about what color is. Cork, who is near you, says nothing. He has seen this before. You have not seen this before. And some part of you that is not quite thought, but is adjacent to thought, is aware of that. Aware that this moment is not a moment that repeats. You are 19 years old, and you left London to pay your father's debt, and you have been at sea for nearly 6 months, and you are looking at India. Calcutta arrives around a bend in the river. It does not announce itself gradually the way London announces itself, with the smoke and noise building over miles until you are inside it before you know it. Calcutta comes around a bend in the Hooghly, and it is simply there, on the eastern bank, more substantial than the vegetation-crowded riverbanks you have been passing for 2 days, and at its center the walls of Fort William, the English East India Company's fortification, a low square structure of brick and earth positioned to command the river. The year is 1703, and Calcutta is young. Job Charnock, the company's agent, established a trading settlement here in 1690, 13 years before your arrival, choosing this bend of the Hooghly because the riverbank offered a firm foundation and the location gave access to the interior trade routes of Bengal. The settlement he chose was 3 villages, Sutanuti, Gobindapur, and Calcutta, from which the English name derives. In 13 years it has grown from a trading post into something that resembles, at least along the riverside frontage where the company's buildings stand, a small English town transplanted into a Bengal summer. Behind the English quarter, which occupies the western bank of the river in a strip, perhaps a quarter of a mile deep, is the city that was here before any Englishman arrived. And that city is not small and not quiet and not in any way concerned with the presence of the English East India Company's fort at its edge. The Exeter anchors in the river off the company's landing ghat. A ghat is a set of stone steps leading from the water's surface to the bank above, and the landing ghat is where cargo goes ashore and where passengers disembark, and it is in continuous use from before dawn to after dark. Boats coming and going, men loading and unloading, the river traffic of a city that uses the river the way London uses its roads. You go over the side on the rope ladder. Your feet hit the bottom of the longboat, and the longboat moves with the river current, and your legs, which have been compensating for the motion of a ship for 6 months, do something complicated, and you grip the gunwale with both hands and wait until the world organizes itself. The rower, a company employee, watches you with an expression that does not quite reach amusement but is adjacent to it. "First time?" he says. "Yes," you say. He nods and rows. The ghat steps are wet and worn smooth by the passage of thousands of feet, and you climb them carefully and come up onto the bank of the Hooghly River in Calcutta, Bengal, India, and you stand there for a moment with the summer heat coming down on your head and the smell of the city coming from every direction at once. The smell is not one smell. It is a layering of smells, each distinct and each contributing to a whole that is unlike anything you have encountered. There is the river, which smells of silt and vegetation, and the organic richness of a river that carries the runoff of a continent. There is cooking smoke from hundreds of fires burning simultaneously, and the smell of the food being cooked over those fires, spices you have no names for, something sharp and something sweet, and something that goes directly to the back of your throat and makes your eyes water briefly. There is the smell of people, tens of thousands of people in proximity, the ordinary human smell of a city multiplied by a heat that does not permit it to dissipate. There is something floral underneath all of it, a sweetness from some plant or tree you cannot see. You stand on the ghat steps and breathe it. Fletcher is behind you and he says move, and you move. The company's establishment in Calcutta in 1703 consists of Fort William, which houses the garrison and the council chambers where the company's senior factors conduct the business of the Bengal trade, the writers' buildings where the company's junior clerks and accountants live and work, a church, a hospital, a small number of private houses belonging to senior company servants, and the warehouses called go-downs where the goods that move through this settlement are stored before loading or after unloading. The go-downs are your immediate destination. The Exeter's cargo must be unloaded, inventoried, transferred to company storage, and exchanged for the return cargo. And this process begins the morning after the ship anchors and does not stop until it is finished. Your role in it is the same role you have had on this ship since London. You carry things, bales of English broadcloth from the hold to the longboats. Bales of English broadcloth from the longboats up the ghat steps. Bales of English broadcloth across the company's yard to the go-down doors, where an Indian man with a ledger records each bale's entry with a precision that suggests the ledger matters to someone who has authority over the man holding it. The broadcloth is the primary export commodity on this route. England produces wool and wool products in quantities that exceed domestic consumption, and the company's trade depends partly on finding markets for this surplus in places where English wool is not produced. India is a market, specifically the Mughal court and the military establishment that supports it, which requires large quantities of heavy cloth for uniforms and furnishings. The company delivers broadcloth from English mills and receives in exchange the commodities that English consumers want and English manufacturing cannot supply. Cotton textiles, which Indian weavers produce in varieties and qualities that no English mill has yet replicated. Saltpetre for gunpowder, and spices, which come through Indian trading networks from further east and command substantial prices in London. You carry bales of English broadcloth in the Bengal summer heat. The weight of a bale is approximately 60 pounds. You have been carrying things of this weight since you were 12 years old, and you are good at it. But carrying things in this heat is different from carrying things in the cold, damp air of the London docks. The heat takes something from you with each trip that the cold never took. A specific kind of depletion that sits behind your eyes and in the muscles of your lower back, and that rest between trips does not fully restore. You drink water when it is available. The water available in Calcutta is river water, drawn from the Hooghly and carried to the company's establishment in clay pots by water carriers who make this journey multiple times a day. It is not the clean well water of the English countryside, and it is not the brine-tinged ship's water you have been drinking for 6 months, and it is something else entirely, with a mineral quality and a temperature that reflects the heat of the Bengali summer, warm even in the mornings. You drink it because you need it, and it does not make you sick, which Petch tells you is a result of luck and a result of drinking nothing else, because a body adjusts. Don't drink anything you're offered in the market, Petch says. Not yet. What happens if you do? You find out what the hospital is for, Petch says. The company hospital in Calcutta in 1703 serves the English employees and garrison and is staffed by a surgeon and 2 assistants whose primary function is managing the diseases that European bodies encounter in Bengal and have no prior immunity to. Dysentery is the most common. Malaria, called the Bengal fever, is the most serious. The hospital's treatments are the same treatments available on the ship: bleeding and purging and the judicious application of compounds whose mechanisms are not understood, but whose occasional effectiveness has been observed enough times to create confidence in their use. You do not visit the hospital. You carry bales and drink water and sweat through your jacket, and at the end of each day you go back to the ship and eat your ration and sleep in your hammock, and the hammock feels different from how it felt at sea. Stiller and hotter, the air below decks in the Hooghly anchorage not moved by any ocean wind. On the 3rd day, Fletcher gives you a half day. A half day is 4 hours. 4 hours is not enough to see Calcutta, and it is more than enough to understand that you have not seen Calcutta, that what you have seen is the company's small English enclave on the river's edge, and that behind it is a city of several 100,000 people living according to a logic that has nothing to do with the English East India Company's ledgers and schedules. You walk out through the company's gate with Petch. The street outside the gate is not a London street. It is wider in some places and narrower in others, without the rectangular regularity that London imposes on itself, and it is full of people moving in every direction simultaneously, in a way that has its own internal order, which you cannot yet read, and until you can read it, the motion is overwhelming. Carts pulled by oxen, men carrying loads on their heads, balanced without hands, at a pace that your body knows from dock work as the pace of sustained labor, but that here is combined with a verticality and an ease that the dock workers of Wapping do not have. Women in clothing of colors you have no names for, because English cloth runs to brown and gray and the occasional dark red of a festival coat. And these colors are a different category of color entirely. Saffron and deep blue and green and a shade of pink that you will never be able to describe accurately to anyone in London. The noise. There is more noise per square foot of street in this city than in any place you have been, including London on its loudest days. Voices in Bengali and Hindi and languages you cannot distinguish from each other. The sound of metal being worked somewhere nearby. The bells of a temple. The call from a mosque 2 streets over. The lowing of cattle that are simply present in the street as if streets are where cattle belong, which in this city they appear to be. A man hands you something. He is a street vendor with a flat tray balanced on his head, and he has lowered the tray and is holding out a small fried item on a piece of leaf, and he is looking at you with the expression of a man who has done this for foreign sailors before and knows what comes next. You look at Petch. Petch shrugs. Eat it. You eat it. It is hot from the oil, and there is something inside it you cannot identify, and a spice that arrives after the first chew and builds steadily until your eyes water and you swallow quickly, and the vendor is laughing, not unkindly, and Petch is laughing, and you are standing on a street in Calcutta in the Bengal summer of 1703, with tears running down your face from a spice you do not know the name of, and it is genuinely the best thing you have eaten since you left London. Not despite the heat of it. Because of it. Because it is real and immediate and present in a way that ship's biscuit is not real, and the boiled salt pork is not real. And your body, which has been managing on the minimum required for function for 6 months, recognizes the difference between something that sustains you and something that you actually want, and it responds. You walk on into the street. The market is 2 streets further. It covers an area roughly the size of the company's yard, and it operates at a density and a volume that the market at Tenerife could not have anticipated. There are sections for vegetables, for cloth, for metal goods, for spices sold loose from open sacks, the spices that have been aboard the Exeter in sealed bales, but that here are simply present in the open air, their smell released by the heat and mixing with everything else in the market into a compound fragrance that is the smell of this place and no other place. You stop at the spice section. The sacks are open, and the colors of the spices inside them are extraordinary. The deep orange-red of dried chilies, the pale gold of ground turmeric, the dark brown of cloves, the gray-green of dried coriander seeds, the near black of peppercorns in quantities that represent, you understand suddenly, the reason English ships have been coming to India for 100 years. A sack of peppercorns in this market costs a fraction of what the same pepper costs in London, and the difference between those 2 prices, multiplied by every sack in every go-down on every ship that the company runs on this route, is the reason the company exists. You put your hand into the sack of peppercorns. The pepper is dry and hard and cool from being out of the direct sun, and you pick up a handful and the weight of it is specific and real, and you think about the fact that every pepper in London passed through a chain of hands that included, at some point, hands like yours. Petch says it is time to go back. You let the peppercorns fall through your fingers. On the 6th day you are sent with Hodges to the company's go-down to assist with the saltpetre inventory. Saltpetre is potassium nitrate, crystallized from soil in the dry river plains of Bihar and Bengal, and it is the essential oxidizing component of gunpowder. Without saltpetre, there is no gunpowder, no guns, no artillery, no cannon, no navy, no empire. The English crown requires saltpetre in quantities that English soil cannot supply, and the East India Company's monopoly on the Bengal saltpetre trade is consequently one of the most strategically significant commercial arrangements in the world in 1703. Every cannon that fires in an English war fires partly on saltpetre that came through Calcutta on a ship like the Exeter. You do not think about this while you are moving the sacks. The sacks weigh 60 pounds each, and they must be moved from the storage area to the loading area and counted as they move, and the count must match the manifest. The man with the manifest is a company writer, a junior factor, approximately your age, who has been in Calcutta for 8 months and who moves through the heat in his company coat with the expression of a man who has accepted his circumstances without reconciling himself to them. The man supervising the Indian workers on the other side of the go-down is the company's banyan. A banyan is a local Indian merchant who acts as the company's commercial intermediary, its translator, its broker, and its guide to the local business world. The banyan's name is Ramchandra Das, and he has worked with the company's Calcutta establishment for 11 years. He speaks Bengali, Hindi, Persian, and English, the last of which he learned specifically for this work. And he knows the price of every commodity that moves through this market, and the name of every merchant of consequence in Bengal. And he is the reason the company's trade functions at the level it functions, rather than at the level it would function if the English factors were left to negotiate alone in a market whose language, customs, and credit networks they do not understand. Hodges does not explain any of this to you. You observe it because you are present in the go-down while it happens, and because you have been at sea for 6 months and your attention, sharpened by months of reading weather and rigging and the faces of men in authority, notices the structure of things. What you notice is this: Ramchandra Das gives instructions and the Indian workers follow them. The company writer consults Ramchandra Das before making any decision. Hodges, who has authority over every man on the Exeter, defers to Ramchandra Das on questions of the market and the merchandise and the timing of the loading. The company's actual operation in Bengal depends on this man more than it depends on the fort or the garrison or the council chambers, and the company's senior factors know this, which is why Ramchandra Das earns more than the company writer and possibly more than Hodges, though you have no way to confirm the numbers. You move sacks. You watch. On the 8th day the loading is finished. On the 9th day the river pilot comes aboard. The Exeter turns in the Hooghly and points south. You stand at the stern rail and watch Calcutta recede around the bend of the river. Behind the retreating waterfront, behind the white walls of Fort William and the company's go-downs and the writers' buildings where junior clerks copy figures into ledgers, is the city you saw for 4 hours on your half-day. You did not see most of it. What you saw was the edge of it, the market, one street, the faces of people going about the ordinary business of a Wednesday afternoon in a city that has been here since before England knew this continent existed. The city was not concerned with you. The city will not remember you. You were a young Englishman from a ship who ate something spicy from a street vendor and paid too much attention to a sack of peppercorns. You will remember it. You will remember it with a specificity that surprises you later. The green bird and the smell at the ghat and the weight of the pepper in your hand. The sound of Ramchandra Das's voice when he gave instructions, and the way the workers moved when he gave them. The color of the cloth in the market. The heat coming up off the stone steps of the ghat at midday. The taste of the fried thing on the leaf. These are the things that fit in your memory. The bigger things, the saltpetre and the monsoon, and the company's accounts, and the structure of the Mughal Empire, are too large for memory at 19. They are the world you moved through. The small things are what you carry. The green bird is not on the bowsprit this time. The bowsprit is empty. The river moves past on both sides, the same low banks, the same dense vegetation, the same boats moving in both directions. The smell of the land is still present, still that layered compound of vegetation and smoke and spice and river, and it will fade over the next 2 days as the Hooghly opens into the Bay of Bengal, and the Bay of Bengal opens into the Indian Ocean. And you will not smell it again until you are back in London and someone in the market at Billingsgate is selling pepper. The bell rings. Your watch. The Exeter moves south. The return voyage is not the same voyage. You are on the same ship, the same route, the same watch system, the same men in the same forward quarters under the same low ceiling. The food is the same food: biscuit, salt meat, dried peas, beer. The bell rings on the same half-hour intervals. Fletcher's voice sounds the same at the start of each watch. The Indian Ocean is the same Indian Ocean. You are not the same person who made the outbound crossing. This is not a sentiment, it is a physical fact. The body that left London in March was a dock laborer's body, strong but untrained, with soft hands and a stomach that rejected the sea's motion, and eyes that had never seen a sky without the haze of a city above it. The body on the return voyage is something the sea has made. The stomach is settled, the sea's motion entirely absorbed into the background of what normal feels like. The eyes can read weather. When you look at the sky now, you see information. The high, thin cloud building from the northwest on the second day out of the Hooghly means the wind will shift within 12 hours, and the shift will come from the south, and the captain will want to adjust the set of the topsails before it arrives, rather than after. You know this not because anyone told you, but because the sky has been telling you for 7 months, and you have been reading it, and the reading has become, somewhere in the last 2 months, automatic. You report what you see to Hodges. Hodges listens without expression and passes the observation to the captain's steward, and 6 hours later the topsails are adjusted and the wind shifts from the south exactly as you said it would, and Hodges says nothing about this, which is how approval works in this hierarchy. The return route through the Indian Ocean runs differently from the outbound passage. The southwest monsoon that pushed you northeast from the Cape to India in June now sits behind you as you move south. but at a different angle, requiring more complex sail management than the straightforward run of the outbound crossing. The experienced sailors on the ship handle the complexity with the ease of men for whom it is familiar, and you work alongside them and learn by proximity, by watching the decisions made and feeling their results through the deck under your feet. The Cape of Good Hope takes 6 weeks to reach from Calcutta. 6 weeks of Indian Ocean, then the turnaround Madagascar, then the cold southerly latitudes, then the Cape. You are in these waters in September, which is early spring in the southern hemisphere, and the weather at the Cape in early spring is the weather that gave it its honest name, the Cape of Storms. The seas that the captain avoided on the outbound passage by timing the Cape crossing for late summer are present now in their full form. The storm begins 2 days before the Cape. It begins as a change in the barometer, which the captain checks each morning, and which has been dropping for 3 days in a way that the captain watches without commenting on, and that Cork watches the captain watching. The cloud builds from the southwest, a gray-white wall that climbs the sky over the course of a morning, and the wind that precedes it arrives in the afternoon, not gently, not as a warning, but as a fact, the full weight of the Southern Ocean driving north ahead of the depression. All hands. The call goes through the ship, and you are up the ratlines before the second bell, and working the main topsail in wind that makes it a different kind of work from anything you have done before. The canvas fights you with a violence that is impersonal and absolute, not malice but simple force. The weight of moving air concentrated against fabric, and the men trying to contain it. The yard bucks under your feet. The man beside you, Walsh, loses his grip for a moment, and catches himself with his legs and does not fall, and there is a half-second between the slip and the recovery during which you see it happening and cannot help, and then Walsh has the yard again and the moment passes. You tie the gasket. You tie it correctly, the correct knot, the correct tension, the first time, in wind and darkness and with a yard moving under your feet. And this is the distance between the man who came aboard in March and the man in the rigging now. The knot is the same knot. The hands that tie it are different hands. The storm runs for 2 days. It is not the worst storm the Cape has ever produced. The Exeter does not lose a mast. Nobody goes over the side. But for 2 days the ship moves through seas that run 40 feet from trough to crest, and the motion below decks is violent enough that sleep is a series of interruptions rather than a continuous state, and eating requires one hand for the food and one hand for whatever is fixed to the ship, and the sound of the sea against the hull is not the sound you have grown accustomed to, but something louder and more insistent, a constant physical argument. On the 3rd day the storm passes to the east. The sky clears from the west, and the sea begins its long subsidence, the waves still large but losing their tops, the gray-white spume that has been blowing off the crests thinning and then stopping, the surface of the sea returning from chaos to the structured regularity of Southern Ocean swells. You stand on the deck in the aftermath. Everything is wet. The deck is wet. Your clothes are wet from spray and from the sweat of 2 days of hard work in cold conditions. The air is cold in the way that southern latitudes air is cold, not the damp cold of England, but a dry, clear cold that carries no fog, only the smell of the ocean and the smell of the westerly wind that has been generating these seas for 3,000 miles without interruption. The Cape of Good Hope is visible to the north. You have been here before, but you have not been here in this state, and the Cape looks different now than it looked in May. It is the same flat-topped rock shelf, the same gray-brown stone, the same agitated water at its base. The difference is in you. In May, you looked at the Cape not knowing what came next. Now you know exactly what comes next, because you have done it. The Atlantic is on the other side of that rock, and beyond the Atlantic is England, and England is 9 weeks away. 9 weeks. The word home has a weight now that it did not have when you left. You left home to escape a debt. Home was the place you needed to get out of. Home was Wapping, and the docks, and your father's cough, and 12 shillings owed to Simcox at the Aldgate counting house. Home was the fixed limit of what you knew. It is still all of those things. It is also the thing you are moving toward. The Exeter rounds the Cape and enters the Atlantic. The Atlantic is familiar now in the way that the Indian Ocean was unfamiliar in June. You know its swells and its winds and the way it smells at latitude 40 south versus latitude 20 north. You know how the trade winds feel when they establish and how the equatorial doldrums feel when the trades give out and the ship sits in dead air for 2 or 3 days, sails slack, the sun directly overhead, the crew waiting for the wind to return. You have crossed this ocean once. You know it. The doldrums. You sit them for 3 days in October. North of the equator, the Atlantic flat and silver, the air so still that the sails hang without shape and the ship makes less than a knot through the water on the current alone. The heat is the overhead tropical sun, and there is nothing to do but wait and maintain the ship and sleep in the forward quarters with the hatch open to catch whatever air moves. On the 4th day, a breath comes from the northeast. It builds through the morning watch, slowly, too slowly, and then it fills the main course, and the ship moves, and the movement of the ship creates its own breeze, and the watch cheers, which is not something watches do, and Fletcher says nothing about it. The trade winds establish. The Exeter moves north. The Canaries appear on the horizon for the 2nd time, and you do not look at them with the same eyes you used in March. In March, the Canaries were the first foreign shore, the first proof that the world continued beyond the gray horizon of the English Channel. Now they are a waypoint, a recognizable landmark on a route that has become, in some sense, yours. The Exeter stops at Tenerife. Water, provisions, a day in port. You go ashore, and the main street of Santa Cruz is the main street you remember. The whitewashed walls, the deep shade in the doorways, the woman selling fruit from the cart. You buy fruit from her, the same kind of fruit, the yellow sweet fruit whose name you still do not know. You eat it standing on the street. It is still good. Petch is not with you this time. Petch is in the hospital in Calcutta with the Bengal fever, which he contracted in the final week before departure. The company's surgeon there told you his chances were fair. Fair is not a guarantee. Fair is what you are left with when the odds are better than poor and worse than good. You think about Petch on the main street of Santa Cruz, eating the fruit, and you do not resolve anything about it because there is nothing to resolve. You either see him again or you do not. You eat the fruit. You go back to the ship. The Atlantic is north of you now, and the Channel is beyond that, and the Thames is at the end of the Channel, and the Thames leads to London, and London contains everything that was waiting when you left. The debt, and the docks, and your father's cough, and the house in Wapping, and the narrow streets, and the grey light, and the smell of the river. The Exeter enters the Channel in November. The air changes the moment you are inside it. It is cold in the familiar English way, the damp cold that settles into your joints and does not leave until spring, and the sky is the flat gray English sky, and the water is the gray-green English Channel water, and the shores appear on both sides, low and brown and distant, and there is a quality of light over England that you did not know was specific to England until you had been away from it for 8 months and are now returning to it. The river pilot comes aboard at Gravesend. He steps onto the Exeter with the practiced ease of his profession and takes the wheel, and the Exeter moves up the Thames. London builds on both sides. Not quickly. The Thames is long, and the city builds gradually, the marshes of the estuary giving way to the flat land of the lower reaches, giving way to the first settlements, Woolwich, Greenwich, and then the river bends, and the city is there, the smoke of it visible first as a darkening of the western sky, then as a smell. You smell London before you see it. Coal smoke and mud, and the river in winter, and the compound smell of a city of 500,000 people living in close proximity, burning coal and making things and moving things and selling things and throwing things into the river. The smell you have known since you were born and which you have not smelled in 8 months. You breathe it in. It is not the smell of Calcutta. It is not the smell of the Cape or the Canaries or the open ocean. It is London, and you are back inside it, and the city receives you exactly as it received you every morning of the first 19 years of your life, without acknowledgement, without ceremony, simply by being what it is and expecting you to find your place in it. The legal quays. The Exeter docks at the legal quays at 7 in the morning on a Wednesday in mid-November, and the gangway goes down, and the company's clerks come aboard with their ledgers. The settlement of wages takes place in the captain's cabin. You wait in line with the other ordinary seamen, while the mate calls names, and men go in and come out with expressions that range from resigned to satisfied to blank. When your name is called, you go in. The purser has a ledger that contains, in neat entries, every transaction involving your wage since the day you signed your name with an X at the Anchor Tavern. The base wage is 22 shillings per month. The voyage has run to 8 months and 3 weeks, which the purser rounds to 9 months for the calculation. 9 months at 22 shillings is £9 and 18 shillings. From this sum the purser deducts your slop chest account. The slop chest is the company's shipboard store of basic necessities, from which sailors can draw items against their wages. In your case, 1 additional pair of trousers, 1 pair of shoes purchased at Tenerife on the outbound passage, and a quantity of tobacco at intervals throughout the voyage. The total deduction is £1 4 shillings. The net sum is £8 and 14 shillings. The purser counts it out in coins on the table between you. You pick it up. You hold it in your hand, and you feel the weight of it, the weight of 9 months at sea, The weight of the Atlantic and the Indian Ocean and the Cape of Good Hope and Calcutta and the storm and the biscuit and the weevils and the heat and the watches in the dark. The weight of Drew going into the sea and Simmons going into the sea and Petch in the hospital in Bengal with the fever. £8 and 14 shillings. Simcox at the Aldgate counting house wants 12 shillings. You keep the rest. You walk down the gangway and onto the legal quays for the first time in 9 months, and your body adjusts instantly to the solidity of the dock beneath you, which is the solidity of stone and timber on land, not the dynamic solidity of a ship's deck. And the adjustment is seamless because your body did this before and knows how to do it again. You walk. You walk north from the legal quays through the narrow streets of the city, carrying your canvas bag, wearing the clothes you wore out of London in March, which are the clothes of a dock laborer rather than a sailor, and which will not be replaced from the £8 in your pocket, because £8 is not money to spend on clothes. The streets are familiar and strange at the same time. Familiar because they are the streets of Wapping, and you have walked them since you could walk. Strange because you are different from the person who last walked them, and the difference shows you things in the streets that the person who left in March would not have noticed. The specific grey-brown of London mud, which is neither the red-brown of the Hoosleigh nor the pale grey of Table Bay. The smell of the coal fires in the houses, which is neither the cooking smoke of Calcutta nor the clean cold of the Southern Ocean. The height of the buildings on both sides of the narrow streets, which shut out the sky the way nothing at sea ever shuts out the sky. The sky above London is very small. You had not noticed that before. You reach the house. Your mother is at the door before you are at the door, which means she heard your step on the street, which means she has been listening for steps on the street for some time, which is something you understand and do not say. She does not say anything either. She steps back from the door to let you in. The kitchen is the same kitchen with the same fire that smokes when the wind comes from the east. And the smell of the bread is the smell of that kitchen, the bread she has been making every morning of your life. And you sit down at the table in the low room, and the fire is lit, and the smell of the bread is everywhere, and the kitchen is roughly the size of the forward quarters of the Exeter, and it feels nothing like the forward quarters of the Exeter. Your father is in the chair by the fire. He looks at you the way men look at things they were not sure they would see again. You put the coins on the table. 12 shillings for Simcox, the rest for the house. Nobody speaks for a moment. The fire makes its sound. The bread smell moves through the room. Outside in the street, a cart goes by. The same sound of wheels on cobbles that you have known since before you knew anything. And inside the room the fire burns, and your father breathes slowly in his chair, and your mother is moving around the kitchen in the way she has always moved around the kitchen. And the sound of the Exeter's bell, which has been the metronome of your life for 9 months, is silent. No bell. No roll of the deck. No sound of the ocean finding its way through the hull. Just the fire. Just the bread. Just the room. You have been at sea for 9 months, and you have crossed 2 oceans and rounded the Cape of Good Hope and stood on the streets of Calcutta and eaten something whose name you still do not know from a vendor's leaf plate, and held peppercorns in your hand on the floor of a Bengal warehouse, and watched 2 men go into the sea, and held a ship on course in the Indian Ocean for 2 hours on a quiet afternoon, and you are back in the house you grew up in the parish of Wapping, on the north bank of the Thames. The fire burns lower. Your father has fallen asleep in his chair, which is what he does in the evenings. Your mother has gone quiet in the way she goes quiet when everything that needs saying has been understood. The room is warm. The bread is on the table. You lean back in your chair. The fire shifts. A coal settles. The sound of the street outside is small and familiar and does not require anything from you. You close your eyes. The ship is far away. The ocean is very far away. The bell will not ring. You are home. Sleep now. Sleep. If this story kept you company tonight, a like or a subscribe means more than you know. We will be here again tomorrow, and the night after that, with another life from the historical record. Another ordinary person standing close to the great machinery of history, carrying their piece of it quietly, as most people always have. Good night.